Hot stove conversations about baseball, history, football, and current events that may leave you saying there's more to consider. Now, here's your host, Jack Moore.
Welcome to another edition of More to Consider. Those of you that listen, the hopefully vastly growing audience, we talk about a lot of things here. We talk about a lot of sports. You see all my memorabilia in the background. We talk politics. I have a legal background. I'm a lawyer. Like to talk politics, history, this type of thing. Today I have on Bryce Eddy. He is the host of the Bryce Eddy Show. It's a bold and unfiltered podcast exploring life, politics, and culture through the lens of conservative values. This gentleman's a Christian. Each episode tackles social issues, personal growth, and the cultural battles that are shaping America. Mr. Eddy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, it is a year of our Lord, 2025, and it's been quite a roll here the last 5 years. I don't know your age. I'm sure I'm older than you are, but I grew up in a particular America, and I think I have a sense of the Ed Sullivan Show, Johnny Carson, et cetera, and we're in that kind of world. We're being entertained. Bread and circuses might be argued. Then some of the veil starts to come off here. It seems as though it accelerates in the last 10 to 15 years. We're starting to see other things, or we're starting to see it through a different lens. What got you started in the podcasting world? What made you go this direction?
Well, like a lot of us, COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was behind the scenes politically for many years, right? You got all that sports memorabilia behind you. I was kind of, politics was my sport,
right.
Although I'm a mixed martial artist. I loved following things back, in the days of Rush Limbaugh and all that stuff. I mean, I saw a lot of what was coming because of what I was digesting, but it wasn't really until COVID where, as you said, that veil or the veneer over civilization started to crumble. And you saw that, okay, we might be a capitalist democracy, representative republic, but the truth is, we've largely been controlled for many years and just had a semblance of freedom.
Right.
Well, all that, I think, got revealed pretty quickly when they, locked down our world, shut our small businesses down and everything there. Our church stayed open in defiance of the government in California, and we fought them and won. And it was, in the news, and it was, sort of a crazy battle. And we were doing, for 7 days a week at the same time, our pastor was doing a little update evening stream.
Right.
And it looked like an ISIS beheading video at first, but they were doing this live stream and kind of telling everybody what was happening. And so I would come onto that show and help him and kind of produce it. And then, we ended up with a podcast afterwards and have kind of continued on since then. So I stepped from sort of behind the camera to, out front and, willing to call things what they were, right, and say it in a kind of a bold manner. So there you go.
I think that's one of the positives, because I mentioned that sort of pop culture view of the world. I know they've unearthed recently this Johnny Carson interview with Mike Wallace and with Colbert going down. And I was talking to a friend, I said, I never knew what Johnny Carson's politics were. And they've unearthed this video from probably the 70s, maybe late 60s. And Wallace is like, why aren't you more political? He goes, well, I'd lose half my fans. It's stupid. And I just kind of take jabs at Republicans, Democrats. It's kind of what I do. So when Colbert went the direction he did, the Fallons and all of these late night talk shows, I'm looking at it, and it's in the midst of COVID when the turn really, really begins to happen. I'm like, what happened to this world that I grew up in? And I will say, that was the eye-opener for me, too. But I'll also say this. I worked at a college, and everybody was batshit crazy lefty. I mean, I kind of knew that. I was at a college, a community college. And I've said this on many shows. In 2019, it's around Christmas, and I'm watching two pretty people, pretty guy, pretty girl, on a particular network, cable network, news. And the female literally says, gas prices are down, unemployment's down, the economy is skyrocketing. What in the hell are we going to do to get this guy out of office? And I'm like, wow, that's really down the center, objective journalism. That's what she says. And the guy says, this is Christmas 2019. I don't know. Kind of depends on what if there was a catastrophic economic event, like the country went sideways economically. That might do it. And I remember thinking, there's these moments in your life, I'm like, they're getting ready to do something. Something's getting ready to come. So March something in 2020, we're all called in at the college. We're shutting things down. You're going to learn to Zoom. You're going to Zoom with your students. And I'm in the hallway with a female that I dearly loved. She was actually, she works somewhere in the administration, I'll put it that way. And she stops me in the hall, and I know she's a Trump fan. And she said to me, and she'll tell you this, oh my God, what do you think is happening? March 2020. So I tell you exactly what's happening. They're getting ready to shut the country down. They're going to blame every COVID death on Trump. This is to get Trump out of office. And she goes, that's what I'm afraid of too. And then I watched it play out. I watched the very thing. So I read 1984, Brave New World. We did all that growing up. And I never thought I'd live in 1984. Like, you never think it's really going to happen. And then I'm seeing it happen. And I'm seeing what the media's doing. I'm watching how people are reacting. And one real defining moment for me, I lost my dad, 92, in 2021, not from COVID. My mom a year later at the age of 91. But what really took them down, I think, emotionally and physically, they lived in an old folks home. They were totally independent. They weren't independent care. But now they lost all their friends. They couldn't go to the cafeteria. They couldn't associate. They're locked up in a place. And I saw what it did to them kind of emotionally. And I'm watching all this go down. And I said to myself, except when I had to deal with my parents and their health issues in their latter days, I was not going to wear a mask. I was not going to do it. I got kicked out of a couple of places. But here's what I wanted to say on that. I'm in a Walmart. And what I heard a doctor say is, hey, just hit them with, and it was in the executive order from the Commonwealth of Virginia did say if you had a medical exemption, and they couldn't ask you the background or anything else. So I'm just like, I'd walk through the door, excuse me, sir, your mask. And I'm like, I got a medical thing. I just keep walking. So I'm in a Walmart, and I'm in the pharmacy line, and I'm the only one of 250 people in the store that doesn't have a mask on. And I side glance, and I see this guy, and he's kind of looking around at me. And he goes, how are you doing this? And I was like, how am I doing what? How are you not wearing a mask? And I'm like, I choose not to. He goes, what do you mean you choose not to? I'm like, they can kick me out if they want, but I'm not going to wear it. And he looks at his wife, and he's like, Brenda, did you hear that? And she's kind of looking at him. He goes, well, damn it. And he pulls his mask off.
That's right.
And then she pulls her off. And I'm like, dude, I'm no tough guy. I'm like, wow. Like I could see in his eyes, like, you just decide not to do this.
Yeah, courage is contagious, right? And in that case, it was courage to reject the kind of, pressure or peer pressure societally, right? Going against the grain. People were afraid to face a little bit of conflict with another human being and say, no, get out of here. I'm not going to wear it, right? But fear was very contagious, and everybody fell in line first because of their fear. And I talked about it, and other people use this, but in the movie A Bug's Life, we were the ants,
right?
And the grasshoppers were owning us. But if we all stood up simultaneously, this whole thing would have collapsed. But they were, relying upon the fear, and they were relying upon smacking down the ones and twosies of us that were doing this stuff. But they ultimately lost because it became more and more people realizing that this thing wasn't what it was advertised as. And they didn't like Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was not liked because, he wasn't going to toe their line. I mean, look, I was never really a big MAGA guy,
right?
Not typical MAGA guy. I mean, I like Donald Trump. I've been to his house, been to gatherings at Mar-a-Lago. I've voted for him. I appreciate him. But, there's people that have like the Trump derangement syndrome on one side, and there's people who think he's the Messiah.
Absolutely.
He's not the Messiah. But what it was is he did love America. He does love America. And he saw what they were doing to us because the enemy is really the globalist.
Right.
The enemy is not really the socialists or the communists. They're just kind of the useful idiots.
Exactly.
That's the sales pitch for the people to, be voluntarily ushered into a feudalism 2.0.
Right.
Because that's what the globalists want. If you think about it, our enemy is the central planner.
Mm-hmm.
Our enemy is the person who thinks that they should accumulate all the control in the world. And they know better than we do. They know better than we do individually or as families or as communities. They're going to plan it all out, and they're going to own us. It's old time serfs is what
Right.
they want us to be. That's the real battle we've been in. And, we have that sort of semblance or image of liberty here in this country. And then, all of a sudden you can't think that anymore. You can't really think that we have liberty because of what you've seen them do to us and what you've seen them do to this president.
We all have these defining moments, and I started doing talk radios in the 90s, and I think it was during that time period. You think I'm not well read. I'm lazy more than anything. I'm lazy. I'm intellectually curious, but I'm very lazy. But somehow or another, I'm either doing radio or it's in that time period. I find out about Bastiat's The Law. And when I read The Law by Bastiat, I'm like,
yeah,
okay, that's it. I get it. So here's a French economist dying of tuberculosis, and he's fighting against socialism in France. And he opens up with the law perverted. And he basically says that when government, let me back up. He says, the most sacred of our rights is the right of self-defense. And all that government can righteously do is collectively protect our rights. And I'm a lawyer, used to teach criminal justice. And I would tell the students, I would always ask them, by what authority questions. I said, all right, let's take Brother Bastiat and what's he saying? You go down the street, somebody hits you over the head, takes your wallet. They've affected your life and they've affected your property. So if the collective, this governmental force, has any righteous duty, it is to make you as whole as possible and punish the wrongdoer. But it's not to feed, clothe, and educate and all the rest. Because once you get into education, you get in necessarily into religion. And then the state becomes a religion, which of course it has. He then defines that when government, given enough rope, will do plunder. And he goes, there's one of two things to do once plunder is done. Either become a part of the plunder or end it. And what we've all kind of accepted, I say we all, many have accepted, well, I just want to be part of the plunder. And, when you hear, it turns my blood cold when I hear people say like, well, I'm voting for the candidate that's going to bring me home the most or whatever. I'm like, really? That's the function of government, is to bring you something? But people think in terms of that. What's it going to take? What's it going to take for you to win my vote? What are you going to do for me, kind of thing? So we're in such a different world. And is it really any that much different than it was 40, 50 years ago? Maybe we didn't know as clearly. But yeah, COVID was definitely a wake-up call, I think, for all of us. And it could be that turning point. And I don't know, that thing of like, I remember Tucker Carlson saying this. I think he nailed it. He goes, when Donald Trump was saying, make America great again, he was talking about 1985. Like that's literally what he was talking about, the 1980s. That's kind of in his head. Because, of course, the critics were like, oh, you want to go back to Jim Crow? And you want, no. Kind of want to go back to the 80s. The Cosby Show was on, right? And we were all watching football and baseball and basketball and again, Johnny Carson. And we all kind of thought we were kind of moving towards that more perfect union. Then we get the 90s, we get the 2000s, and everything with 9/11 changes. It just changes. Now, I wrote my master's thesis on the Kennedy assassination. And while I am someone that has always believed Oswald did it, because I've been to Dallas many times, if you're in that window, it's a doable shot. I'm no marksman, but I get it. But I always wondered what Oswald's background really was. And as more and more things have been released through the years, I kind of think it's probably what a guy told me in 1994, who was a page to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I met this guy. He tells me his background he has. And I said, okay, dude, what am I not going to learn for 50 years? And he said, Oswald did it. I saw everything. Problem is who he did it for. And then as everything has gone on over these last 60 years, as things have been slowly, released, it does kind of seem like there was a cover up. And yes, there may be some complicity. I say that to say this. Everything changed with that. It really did in this country, because then we're Gulf of Tonkin's a lie. And we find out about Operation Northwoods that they took to Kennedy and he rejected it. There's been this clandestine, certain alphabet agencies running our country.
Sure.
And I actually did a show with Scott Horton the other day, who talks a lot about foreign policy. What I picked up on in the Ukraine-based impeachment of Trump is Vindman, for one, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and some of these CIA types were very clear in, I don't know who the hell this guy thinks he is, but he doesn't run foreign policy. We do. Presidents come and go, but so I think that's what's really kind of been exposed. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem with our republic is the 4-year timeline. There's a lot of people that talk about term limits and things like that for Congress and all that stuff. And the challenge with us versus a Chinese Communist Party is they are able to think in much longer time horizons.
Right, no doubt.
And so as a default, the people who actually run our government is the staffers.
That's right.
That's why I'm not really in favor of term limits for Congress and some of those, which is normally a conservative opinion.
Sure.
The reason is because I've been close to congressmen and I've spent time, in those halls, and I understand who really runs it. And It is a cabal of what we would call the deep staters, right? Or permanent Washington, if you're offended or you think that deep state term is too conspiracy theory. But the truth is they tell these guys, for the most part, here's how this works. Right. Here's how you should vote. We read this thing. This is what we want you to do. They do it in subtle and manipulative ways. And then the ones that are the very powerful staffers or the very powerful congressmen or the people that really make it run take all the junior people and say, hey, fall in line.
Right.
If you don't fall in line, we're going to primary you. And it's very rare that you have a Thomas Massey who owes no one anything
God, I love
really
him.
Cannot be bought.
I love him.
He's a guy, he's a guy that really just doesn't care. And he lives on a, remote, self-sufficient farm off the grid. Right. He's already wealthy. He doesn't want anything. Right. So, guys like him are incredibly rare, but everybody else is just owned by the establishment. And that's why we don't really have a two-party system. We have that uniparty with a couple of people on the fringes that are kind of doing their own thing independently. But otherwise, we as the American people have lost the power because you can't really get rid of these people. And every 4 years, a new sheriff's in town, but really the new sheriff's the old sheriff, because it is just those people behind the scenes that just run it and jump from one administration or one congressman's office to another. Oftentimes the political party affiliation doesn't matter to these staffers. They're there just accumulating power and getting things done behind the scenes.
I saw, and I think it might have been Tucker Carlson. I mentioned him a couple times here, but I was watching a podcast, pretty prominent podcaster, and he had like a 2 or 3 term congressperson on in the House of Representatives. And whoever was doing the interview said, what's it really like there? And he goes, well, there's about 10 to 20 figures, pop figures, like, and then of the 435, 90% more are just totally anonymous. Nobody knows anything about them.
Right.
They do what they do, and everything's driven. So, lately it's been Jasmine Crockett on the right, Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I also heard one of the ones going out recently said that Marjorie Taylor Greene was real. I mean, she really believes what she's doing, and also said really positive things about Gates, that there are some true believers. And then, and the things have come out about Crockett. They've got her 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah, she's very
a fraud. Prim and proper, and And now she becomes
she's not ghetto at all. That's just
right.
Really
that's it. You said it for me, right? But basically, so they're actors. They are actors, and the AOC.
They're playing a role. I mean, AOC was literally, pulled out as somebody who could act the way they wanted her to act. I mean, and that's unfortunately more common than you would believe. And some of the people that you named, I mean, I know Marjorie Taylor Greene. I have a really great story about her that maybe I'll tell sometime publicly. It's pretty funny.
Sure.
I told this story in Versailles, France, to a couple of friends sitting across from me at a little cafe, and this couple was staring at us and kind of eavesdropping, and I didn't know, but they were Americans. And at the
Right.
end of it, I'm telling this story, and the wife says, "I'm so sorry, we were listening to this story, but my husband is Marjorie Taylor Greene's policy director."
Wow.
And I go, "Hey," and he goes, "I'm telling you, that story is legendary around our office, and you told it without exaggeration."
Right.
And it was just funny to be validated that way. Someday I'll tell that story
Okay.
to the audience.
Okay.
But it was just the truth is, and I got to meet her, and I met her that evening of this story that I'm mentioning. But I got to meet her, and she is real.
Yeah.
And I like people who are real, and
Sure.
I like people who are rabble rousers, who are independent and authentic. And she is one of them. Thomas Massey is one of them. Gates was one of them.
Matt Gates,
and that all these people are not, none of them are without their own problems,
Sure.
and proclivities and challenges and controversies and all that stuff. But I'd rather have those people than the robots that are just absolutely fleecing the American public.
So we lost the plot a long time ago. I did a show recently with pretty big time Constitution guy, and I was like, when I look at the history and I look at the formation, first of all, I don't think the Constitution is at all some magical document. I think it's just a very rigid set of what the jurisdictions are, where the powers are. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's not a lot to it, really, when you look at it.
It's actually pretty clear as well.
Yes, exactly.
So for the people who try to, see beyond it or consider
breathing document, living, breathing.
Yeah, that's not for these times.
Yeah.
They were thinking in terms of muskets. They didn't intend for you to have semi-automatic weapons or things like that.
Let's go down that road real quick, because I think it was, again, now I'm from Virginia, and I mentioned this on just about every show. Okay, and I have pictures of Secretariat up here too that was born in the same county that I grew up in, but the greatest athlete to ever come out of America was Secretariat. But Virginia's got a lot to be proud of. But I was doing a show with a Virginia friend. I said, when you stop and think of it, father of our country, George Washington. And when you think about it, wrote the Declaration primarily, Thomas Jefferson. And when you think about it, wrote the Constitution primarily, James Madison. So like when it came to writing the documents, and a matter of fact, I was at Old Dominion University years ago, and Bill Bennett said, if you're from Virginia, be proud of it. Probably, and think about this, the greatest collection of political genius in the history of the world was in Virginia.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much true, right? So we grew up believing it. We kind of grow up where, this is the kind of things we grow up, and we're very proud of the people that in the first 36 years of our country's existence, 32 of them had a Virginian as president of the United States. But what those people thought in making a republic, I really believe, was it was a bunch of states coming together for a common defense. And I was doing this show the other day with the Second Amendment guy, and I said, what really slapped me in the face about 10 or 15 years ago, I'm really deep diving into Madison. I'm like, whoa, I think I finally get it. They didn't want standing armies. That's all this is really about. It's not about the type of weapon, the type of firearm. They were repeating weapons already at that point in the 18th century. So it wasn't like, they didn't think in terms of the potential. But then I made this point. In Article 1, Section 8, it says, I think it's 6 words, provide for the Navy, and generally in like 6 words, provide for the Navy. Okay. What does that mean? Standing Navy. Then it says, raise the armies, but only times of military need, never for more than 2 years, blah, 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 from the state militias. So in their world, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, what they're saying is the people have to fight the battles. And a good friend of mine pointed out, Second Amendment, firearms. Third Amendment, quarter neck. Fourth Amendment, got to have probable cause to get that warrant or arrest me. Why? Because the British went house to house and took their weapons and slept in their beds and came in without probable cause.
That's right.
And so if you're forming a country, you're like, okay, who are our leaders going to be? Same race, ethnicity, religious background. We're going to put those guys in charge. Well, how the hell do we know they won't do the same thing the Crown did?
That's right.
And this guy made a really great point. We may have been one of the only countries that was founded in a period where there wasn't a greater necessity of a tool than a firearm. So you got these British types coming across 3,000 miles and hitting the shore. And if you don't have firearms, you don't survive. So they're over there playing with their weapons. And the British are like, yeah, the king doesn't want us to have a weapon. Okay, I didn't grow up under that. But Americans aren't growing up under that. They're growing up with a firearm over the mantle, grandpa's rifle.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was very well understood. I mean, it's only become controversial, as we became so prosperous over the last, 20, 30, 40 years, where, you've got this whole generation of people that are soft, that aren't growing up with the understanding that life is dangerous and that governments are tyrannical, given to their own devices.
Right.
But it was incredibly well understood that we were to be able to defend ourselves, and we were able to defend ourselves against an out of control government like our founding fathers did against Britain.
But brother, I think a lot of what they would have thought is, as long as we're fighting the wars, you and I, we're the militia. We're of that age that, go down to the local church and muster with, that's going to be, but it would be regulated by the several states. That's what they're saying. So I said on the show one time, and the guy goes, no, it's supremacy clause. I'm like, well, first of all, we haven't gotten to the 14th Amendment and this sort of fundamental rights being applied to the states through the 14th Amendment's due process clause. My point was, I think in 1801, Commonwealth of Virginia could have regulated the firearms however they wanted. They could have regulated the militia in whatever manner they wanted. All that the Constitution was saying is, we won't take the weapons. We're going to leave that to the states to regulate the weapons to support the having of a militia so that the citizen is the one fighting the wars. And if we don't have standing professional armies, you don't have anything to worry about, basically. Well, that went out the window, certainly generations ago. And now all of that's lost. And in the cases where the Supreme Court has ruled in Heller that you have like some absolute right to home ownership of a weapon I don't think that's what the Second Amendment's about at all. I don't mind that they came to that conclusion. I don't, but I don't think that's a fair reading of the Second Amendment. But I do think you have a God-given right to defend yourself and have weapons in your home. But I think all the Second Amendment was really about is they didn't want standing armies. They wanted the states to regulate the militias and call the militias up in times of military need. But go ahead.
I think that's an interesting and valid perspective. I don't totally agree because of the other writings and kind of the general understanding of things at the time. I think we forget some of the other contexts that are at play, but I don't think you're. Well,
let me give you.
Let me give you on the same side,
right?
Of the debate. It sounds like.
But have you ever read that? And another thing, as the Constitution was ratified, many of the states either formed a new constitution for their state, or they ripped up their old and started over. Have you ever read Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania said hunt Bambi, home protect. They said it all in their constitution.
Correct.
So then you ask yourself, why does Pennsylvania find it necessary to write these things? I think it's because I don't screw whatever the federal government or the Bill of Rights says. We're telling you, if you're a resident of Pennsylvania, here are your rights as a firearm ownership.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing. What's difficult is in the world of those people in, say, 1795, if we had said, you think you have a right to get, hell yeah, you get, how you going to hunt? They wouldn't have thought.
And that's kind of my suggestion in some of this. And there's a lot of, writing, I think that made this clear, but my perspective is at that time, I mean, it was just generally understood that we had this right, which is why it was too vague. It's why because I think if they knew what we were facing today, there's so many things that we are facing today that I think the Constitution did a beautiful job, but when they were writing it, they never ever imagined that people would be saying that men could get pregnant or some of these other things that are happening today. Right. I mean, they would have thought we all lost our minds. Some of the debates that we're having now. I mean, so they could not have completely foreseen. Now, what they did do was brilliant because they did really set up a powerful founding document. They did set up something that is broad enough that it really covers so much without you mentioned earlier that you're kind of a libertarian type, and I tend towards that. I think that, libertarians can generally go too far, and like the Libertarian Party and some of those folks are out of their minds. But I think they could not have imagined that we were going to have 3 million laws. And every law that we have is ultimately backed by violence or at the point of a government gun.
Always the point of a gun.
And you
always.
can take that logically. Yeah,
yeah,
you can take
it
that
always
logically
is.
to its end.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what thing you violate. If you don't ultimately comply,
somebody shows up with a gun.
That's right.
That's right.
Someone will visit violence upon you.
That's right. Well, and let me say this too. I'm the little L libertarian. And I think that if you're a libertarian type of thinker, you can't make a political party work, because the very nature of your being is to really be opposed to what politics is. Now, I would agree with you. There are people in what is called the Libertarian Party I think make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's
the party itself, they're losers and they're out of their minds.
But they may be. I think there's some good people in it. I mean, like I've become a real fan of Dave Smith and listen to him. And Dave Smith was really turned into the political figure he is by Ron Paul. And I think Ron Paul nails it all. Ron Paul is a beautiful man, just turned 90. He's a medical doctor. He's a war veteran. God bless Ron Paul.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm not a big fan of comic Dave Smith, but I am a big fan
I understand.
of Ron Paul and even Rand. I think
I think Rand's okay. Yeah,
good job carrying some of his dad's legacy. But my position is, we should have looked at. I mean, our founding fathers had this concept that we as a citizen are to know the law.
That's right.
Right? We're participating here as a citizen. We need to know the law. It's unknowable now. It's completely unknowable because we thought, and our state legislators, I mean, California is a perfect example where they had something like 17,000 laws one year that they were pushing through. And that's using, I mean, regulations are laws too. Regulations are just another form of law.
That's right.
But they put so many things through. It was literally, their thought was, and they're judging the politicians this way, by the way, how many laws can we get?
I know.
Signed?
I think that's crazy.
I mean, that's bizarre to me.
It
should be how few laws can we get away with, not as how many can we get done. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I know. I totally agree. One of my law professors did, and you may have seen it because it got to be pretty viral, I think, in social media and on YouTube. And students were always surprised. I'm a former prosecutor. My dad was in law enforcement, and my grandfather was in law enforcement. A lot of law enforcement in the family. And my dad would have said this exact same thing. Had a law professor do a whole speech, or he actually had 45 minutes, and he had a police officer who was in law school at the time do the other side. But he was explaining why you never speak to the police. You never talk to the police.
Yeah.
And I was at a Christian university, and people are like, but the police are our friends. And he goes, no, it's never any upside in talking to police. Ask Martha Stewart. Now, when I was teaching a few years ago, somebody's like, well, who is she? And I told a little bit of the backstory. And I said, she literally was being investigated for insider trading. And when they couldn't really find that, they used some of the statements she made. Like, hey, can we talk to you? Sure, So she makes some inaccurate statements, and they get her on this federal law of being less than truthful to a federal agent, which if she'd never spoken to them, they don't have a case. Then the students are like, well, what is insider trading? I'm like, well, that's like when Bud Fox tells Gordon Gekko about Blue Star Airlines. So I pull up the clip from Wall Street, and I'm trying to explain it to them and all. But they're shocked at it. And I said, look, when cops come around to talk to you, and they say it has nothing to do with you, it's about somebody else, they're lying to you, okay? And you're going to slip up and say the wrong thing, and you're going to say that you're at some place, or you're going to give them some slight bit of information they wouldn't have otherwise had, and you're probably going to be in trouble. And they're shocked by that. But
it really is, show me the man and I will show you the crime. And it is because we have so many laws that they can do that. They can jam you up on anything they really want to.
Well, and that was part of what he talked about was, did you know that it was something about bringing a particular type of crab from a particular country back into the United States, you violate all these different laws. And he said, it doesn't matter if you knew the United States law, the other countries' law, because there's a law that is kind of a coverall. I'd have to go back and look at the exact wording, but it was like, if you're in violation of someone else's law, it was a violation of federal law. So he went on to say exactly what you're saying. He was given the just thousands and thousands of laws that are out there that we're breaking every day, and we don't even know it because there's such a volume of laws, and no one could be that knowledgeable. And prosecutors and people in law enforcement don't know what the laws are either. I mean, it's not like they're running around. But and I thought that same thing or what you just said too. I've always thought, like, why is it a campaign ad to say, I proposed 18 pieces of legislation and Jimmy over here didn't propose any? Like, for what? It's always something else in the news they decide to make a law out of. All right. So again, I think that we're very much on the same page with a lot of this. I think I have the magic wand solution, which I've been saying as long as I've been walking, basically. You got to abolish public education. First of all, it's unconscionable.
I don't disagree.
Right. I mean, now the Commonwealth of Virginia has something in it about free public education, at the expense of the taxpayer. There's certainly nothing in the federal Constitution that would allow for a Department of Education and all the rest. But as long as we're capturing little minds from kindergarten through K, I mean, if it's K through 12 education and you have people who are creating great little statists, we're not getting anywhere.
Correct.
So how do we undo that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so I've talked about this before, and we homeschooled our children, right?
Right.
And it was something that it's certainly not for everyone, but what we wanted to do was remove them from that system. I think I'm grateful for what Trump has attempted to do, and they're still, in process with the Department of Education. But you cannot argue that throwing more money into that system, has improved it over the years.
Never will.
We pay in states like California or other places, there's more money per student. Than ever before, and the test scores have never been worse than before.
That's right.
And you can see that over time. The more that we got standardized education instead of creating a competitive environment, the more the thing really did fall apart. And, if you send your kids, to be raised by Rome, they're going to come out as Romans.
That's right.
And that's, and that's what we have seen. And we've seen them get indoctrinated over time in ways that I think parents were never prepared for. I think people don't really understand the ramifications of what a public education paid by the taxpayer really does, both explicitly and implicitly to your kids. And when you start to think of, what they are being taught, just the system itself, I think it's especially terrible for boys, the idea of, being locked up in a classroom for hours a day.
Right.
It's a system that was, created in Prussia.
It's the Prussian system. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And meant to create compliance.
That's right.
Meant to create things that just, again, have terrible long-term ramifications. And right now I think we're eating the results of that.
I'll tell you something that I go back and practice law. I want to go back and coach college baseball, which I'm doing again. But at the time, I went to a school to coach college baseball and teach. And they're like, we're going to put you in the criminal justice program. I'm like, okay, good. And I'm teaching. I got a master's in history, so I'm doing history classes. So I'm in a class, and I ended up talking to some educators, the people in the education system, about what happened to me. The story I'm getting, this is a beautiful story. I'm in a class, and I have a young lady in the back of the class who, if she didn't show up the last 6 weeks, she would have had an A. Okay. She has 100 plus everything she's done. She never comments. She never adds anything to discussion. She just basically sits around the back of the class and mopes all the time. So one day I'm talking about the incorporation doctrine. I'm talking about the 20th century and how the Supreme Court began to say there's fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights that through the 14th Amendment's due process clause, we're going to apply to the states. Okay, that starts. And I'm explaining that. And I see this little light go on in a kid's eyes down into my left. And this guy goes, Mr. Moore, are you saying that the Bill of Rights didn't apply to the states prior to that? I said, funny thing, son. There was this case in 1833, Barron versus Baltimore. And Barron sues Baltimore, the mayor. He sues the state of Maryland, the governor. He sues everybody because they changed the waterways around his wharf and he lost money. And he does it under the Fifth Amendment's takings clause, right? And John Marshall says, hey, nice try. You got some really good legal reasoning here. Here's the problem. Doesn't apply to the states. It only applies to the federal government. The whole time I'm having that conversation, her head is literally spinning around on her shoulders. I'm not kidding. So she's spinning and I see the agitation, but Jimmy up front wants to know. And I'm like, Jimmy, there was Barron versus Baltimore, right? And I'm like, how many history teachers even know the background? I'm explaining it to him. So then I look back at her and I'm like, excuse me, ma'am, did you have something you wanted to add? And she goes, this stuff you're talking about, is that first half of American history or second half? I'm like, well, since the textbook defines it at the end of Reconstruction in 1877, yeah, 1833 is before 1870. What I'm driving at is this thing you're talking about going to be on the test? And I'm like, no, are you going to be tested on Barron versus Baltimore? No. And she goes, well, would you please stop talking about it? True story, right? And she's a straight A student. So talking to a group of educators later, and I said, should that exchange have really happened to me? This kid had a really interesting question. I told him the background that, yeah, they'd actually rule that Bill of Rights didn't apply to the states prior to the 14th Amendment, and the view was taken in the 20th century. And they go, oh, you know what you got there, don't you? And I said, well, that's your standards of learning student.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And they're like, oh, yeah. All the teachers have the pressure of how well they do on standards of learning. So they teach to the test. And you don't talk about anything else. So she's here to get her A. She's got her 100 average. She wants to know what's on the next test. And you getting into your Barron versus, that is not her. And she's pissed and she's going to write you off. She's going to write really bad things about you in your evaluation, which was true. That's how they see it. And I'm like, is this for real? And they're like, no, you can't freestyle with like extra information or a backstory that explains the history. They don't want to hear that. They want to know what's on the next test. And brother, that's what I began to see. The best students would be your best COVID people for the government. They're going to be the ones that are going to follow it. And I'm sure you've seen the Milgram experiment, the one in the early 60s, at Yale, I think it was at Yale, where the guy wanted to know how did all these Nazis, do what they did. Have you ever seen this where they did the voltage thing?
Yeah. Or the one where they just did the different size lines, and I forget what that experiment was called. And they had everybody agreeing on something that was not true,
right?
And eventually that person agreed on it too, because of just that pressure to conform is great.
But what was kind of interesting.
The Milgram experiment was fascinating.
Well, yeah, and for those that haven't heard this, Milgram was kind of like, how can this happen? How can these people that were well-educated, culture, music, literature, how could they have fallen like for the Nazi regime? And what was interesting is they go in and every time there's two people in the room, they have the test or they have the subject that's going to be the one going into the room screaming every time. The other guy doesn't realize every time he's not randomly being selected. So they put a guy in the room and they tell them every time they miss a question, they got to turn up the voltage. And then they're like, just remember at 180 is going to kill the guy. And they're flipping 300 if they keep telling them to do it. So the moral of the story was, it seemed like the people who were in the shirt and tie, better educated, they were the ones more susceptible to turn up the voltage. The guy that turned wrenches down at the local garage is like, screw this. I hear the guy screaming on the other side. I'm getting out of here. So it was funny who fell for that more. And did we not see the same thing with COVID? My friends who went to all the right schools, they're like, well, I'm just going to see what Fauci says. Fauci's clearly a professional. Like, you can't see through this guy. And it was like religious blasphemy. They were just really mad about that. So again,
and you did see that the people that were, the biggest Karens, the people that were ratting out their neighbors were those same people. I mean, it was, it was wild. And if you ever, and those are the people that would tell you that they would have, protected Anne Frank.
Exactly.
And they would, and they wouldn't have ratted out. Yeah, okay, right.
No, you're so right about that too. Thomas Sowell one time said, he goes, all the people that bitch and moan about slavery would have been the first one to own a slave. They wouldn't have been an abolitionist. They would have been on this. If they lived in the Deep South, they would have been for it. They would not have been. I think, they project themselves back in history like, oh yes, I would have been Hyde and Anne Frank. You're right. But then they're the same ones that don't mind turning in their neighbor. At the same college where I was working, with so much glee, it was frightening. This guy came in one day and he goes, there's a new app. And everybody's like, what's that? There's an app where if you find out your neighbor has COVID, you can turn them in or tell them, you can kind of track where they're going or something. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? He was gleefully. Yeah.
I always looked at those people and I just couldn't understand, because I'm a person that, I'm not going to, tell on my neighbors for anything and everything unless it's directly assaulting me. Like,
sure.
I don't engage in gossip. I don't, I'm one of those people that I just can't imagine being the first one to, run to the hotline. It's like, why, what about you makes you that kind of human being? And going back to the educational thing, I want to have people be intellectually curious.
Mm-hmm.
I want kids to have inquisitive minds, and you can equip them for life. You can equip them for entrepreneurial pursuits if you just teach them to be inquisitive and to be curious, and then add on top of that a layer of can do and work ethic, and you will have a successful person, whether they can spell well or not. You're going to end up having very successful people who, if they just are curious, work hard, and have the right attitude. And those are the people that I know I can make something out of. And those are the kind of people that I want to hire, every single time.
So let me ask you this big question. So we've all lived through this same time together. Let's go, 10 years back. Trump announces, we see what happens. Now we have to be pretty sure that an absolute government-sponsored underlying soft overthrow of his administration was happening. It was happening from the time he was running. Wherever that goes, we don't know. But culturally, by the time Trump is going in for re-election, as we've spoken about, we have this COVID thing. It divides the nation. We start to see sides of people we've never seen before. Celebrities, people in the spotlight. We're starting to see. I'll tell you this. I literally stopped listening to a radio guy in football. Always kind of listened to him. And one day he said, I saw where Kirk Cousins won't take the vaccine. And while he may think that's personal to him, he has a whole team that's relying on him, whatever. So shut up and take the vaccine. I cut him off that moment. And now here 5 years later, I've never listened to him again. He was a football guy. But when I heard him say that a guy owed it to his teammates to do an experimental whatever, he has no idea what that does to him or his family. I'm like, screw you, dude. I cannot believe that you're imposing that upon a professional football player for the good of the team. He has to, get into the. So I see people exposed for having thoughts I never thought they would have. So we're in that space. What I'm afraid of now is 2024 might not have been the turn of the switch that we might have thought. I definitely thought that 21 through 24, there was such a bad track record by a political party not mentioned here, but we were kind of like, man, they can't win again with this. I hope, but certainly they can't. And Trump had survived a shot and another guy on a golf course. And you kind of started to see maybe some divine something going on. It kind of looked kind of weird that he turned his head. So we're in this space. And I'm afraid that some of America saw that as a return to what we grew up with, this kind of, I don't think we're there at all. I think we're pushing. I do see the numbers of 17 to 21-year-old kids are going to church again. They're becoming more conservative. They're like the 22s to 29s are lost. That generation's, or that aspect of the generation's lost. But kids are becoming more and more down on the woke culture. They're moving in another direction. So I ask you, from where you sit and what you observe, do you think we're moving in a better direction? Do you think is there kind of a revival? Is there something going on in the country? Or do you think this is a quiet before another storm?
Okay, so our enemies, and I say that enemy, capital E, right?
Right.
Because I do think there's a spiritual element to all these things.
Absolutely.
But our enemies, lowercase, are relentless and unstoppable, because a lot of like the left, what animates them is envy. Now I'm talking about the useful idiot types.
Right.
They envy, and that envy, that that emotion, that sin is incredibly powerful, and they will tear things down whenever they can and however they can forever. That's what we're dealing with. We will never completely defeat it. We can just hold back the hordes. And we had an amazing respite here in the United States because of our founding fathers, our founding documents, the unique way that we set up this republic. But we are going to be constantly in that battle. What we're facing is a generational problem too. And with generational problems come generational solutions, right? We're starting to see something that gives me great hope. And that is all of the young people that are coming up right now, the kids that are in high school and just about to be entering into college, especially the young men. I mean, almost exclusively the young men, because the young women aren't polling quite the same. But they are far more conservative. They are far more oriented towards meritocracies. They are far more, can do. Let's get it done. It's up to me. They're just naturally now, because of COVID and all the stuff and everything that was exposed, and because of the work that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point and some of these other organizations have done, they are going in the right direction. That's how we are going to have a big change. Right now, we were so close to absolute disaster and the complete destruction of the United States of America. I mean, I don't think people understand how close we were. This election was so important. We have a momentary reprieve, basically, and we had a couple of years here to get some things done. I think Trump has done a better than expected job, but not enough for what we really need to have done. But I'm less concerned with that than I am with what this generation is going to do. And seeing that this generation might be turning things around, I'm happy. And it brings me great hope. I do think that the young men are all we need, because strong young men returning to a good, strong masculinity and leadership and good principles, the women will follow them.
And the women are saying that. I hear the young women are saying, no, I want a real man. I want somebody to father some babies and take care of the household. And I mean, that's kind of where women are going too. They're kind of over some of what this pop culture has also fed them as well. We are at the end of one of the 80-year cycles. So is it American Revolution to American Civil War to World War II? Yeah. And then, so hard people, people that have been put in hard times, create soft people that create, the whole cycle.
Yep.
So we're at the end of one of those. Cycle. Yeah. And so we're at the end of one of those 80-year, or we're in the midst of that 80-year cycle. And, we're 80 years out from the war ending. And so I'm a college baseball coach. And one thing about it, you get a year older every year, the players keep coming in 18, 19, 20. And I can tell you there's a marked difference in the kids I've coached in the last 10 years. Now, love these kids. Yeah. Kids are different.
Yeah. I've had a professor on recently who's recognized that, and they're calling it the vibe shift. And of course, he's right wing, and all of his left wing professors are like, "Oh no, what are we going to do?"
Yeah.
because they're feeling like they've lost these kids, and thankfully,
In effect, they have.
yeah, thankfully, because that's what we need. So, and thank you. I'd love to come back on.
I'd love to have
I
you.
think
Love to have you.
Yeah, you and I could go for a couple of hours, I think, without trying.
Yeah.
But I am. I mean, I'll leave your audience with this. I am optimistic. I'm a natural optimistic because I am a Christian, and I do believe we serve a big God who's ultimately in control of these things. But we nearly lost everything, and I'm not exaggerating.
No,
with
I
that.
agree.
I don't think people knew how close we were, but I have a lot of hope for the future.
Please tell everybody how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can follow my show, the Bryce Eddy Show, on really every platform. We're primarily on video on Rumble. If you want to catch our podcast, you can find us on wherever you consume your podcasts. You can follow me on Super Bryce Eddy at Instagram, and then Bryce Eddy 1 on X. If you want to see me, get some brain damage, arguing with some people and stirring it up.
Well, sir, it's been a great pleasure to have you on. You're doing God's work, and God bless you and your family. And I would love to do this again very soon. Enjoyed having you.
Yeah, let's make it happen.
God bless you,
so
sir.
much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe and hit your notification button to get an update when we post another episode. See you soon.